Marianne Fitzwalter was once heir to a large estate on the west coast of Scotland. Her father was Duke Fitzwalter of Cardross, a powerful nobleman who was well liked by his people, for he was good to them and paid a fair wage for their toil on his lands and the river that ran beside his property. Marianne was given a good education, learning the usual things such as arithmetic, grammar, astronomy, and philosophy. A very bright young woman, she also entertained an interest in engineering in her spare time, building useful or sometimes merely amusing contraptions with her elderly tutor Hob. Of course, being a member of the northern tribes, she learned how to fight. Starting from a very young age, Marianne was trained to use a dagger, sword, and a crossbow. By the time she was an adult, her speed and agility were unmatched in Cardross and the surrounding villages. She was happiest spending time in the forest that fringed her father's lands, for she felt a deep affinity with nature. Hunting was a necessity, of course, so despite her love for the animals of the greenwood, she often used her small crossbow to bring down rabbits and deer, taking no pleasure in killing, despite the fact she was so good at it. Any surplus food from her father's household was shared with the workers on the estate. In the forest one day, she came upon an enormous boar with its young. Startled, the beast attacked, and although Marianne was able to loose a bolt from her crossbow into the boar's back, its hide was too thick for the missile to penetrate. The enraged animal charged directly into her mount, killing it while Marianne somehow managed to pull herself up into a tree. The boar, realizing she was no longer a threat, hurried away, snorting in triumph with its young. When she was sure it was safe, Marianne returned home. Her crossbow had failed her, and she vowed never to let it happen again. With old Hob's help, she designed a new weapon that could fire 3 powerful bolts, either singly or all at once, yet was small enough to be worn strapped to her wrist. It even had a makeshift blade on the end, which could be used in close quarters combat. When she was in her 20s, Marianne's mother passed away, and the running of the estate fell to her. She had known that day would come eventually, and much of her education had been spent preparing for it. Eventually, of course, when the old Duke also died, the lands and the title of Lady of Cardross would be passed down to Marianne. And then a delegation arrived from the lands in the south. The state had come to demand tribute and pledges of fealty from all the tribes and the families of the north. Some of the smaller clans bent the knee quickly, knowing they couldn't withstand the might of this new power. Other lords, too proud and fierce to give in without a fight, rejected the state's demands and sent the delegates on their way. Marianne's father was one such noble who angrily chased the envoys back to the south. She was in the forest, gathering wood for a new engineering project she was working on with Hob when the state soldiers returned to Cardross. They left the workers alive, for without farmers and laborers, the land would be worthless. But Duke Fitzwalter, Marianne's beloved father, was butchered without mercy. Their orders were to kill her too, but a fleeing servant found her and warned her to escape. Old Hob had not been so lucky. He shared the murdered Duke's fate, and the state placed one of their own men in charge of Cardross, while a garrison was built next to the Fitzwalter family home. So Marianne's birthright was stolen from her, along with her father and tutor. She might never be Lady Marianne of Cardross, but she refused to simply fade away into the shadows of history, while the state picked clean the bones of her estate. So, she embarked on a one-woman guerrilla war against the state. Starting in Cardross, she assassinated the first of the new governors installed in her old house, hammering 3 crossbow bolts into his back as he sat in the study that had been her father's favorite place to work. Marianne fled from her homeland then, leaving it behind, perhaps forever. She was only just getting started, though, and traveled southwards, killing high-ranking state officers wherever she found them. Her skill as a hunter kept her safe, and she eventually found herself near one of the biggest of the southern cities. A state convoy was traveling slowly through the forest. Marianne had been stalking them for hours. It was guarded by 5 soldiers, so she knew there must be something or someone of great value within the covered wagon. Whatever was in it, she vowed would be hers. Before she could strike, though, a roar split the air, and as Marianne watched in surprise, the biggest man she'd ever seen launched himself from the branches of a tree onto the back of the foremost state soldier. They went down in a heap, but only the giant got back up. His bare arms were hugely muscled, and he carried a great hammer, and as another soldier came for him, he battered the man's sword aside and headbutted him. But it seemed the giant had underestimated his opponents, who converged upon him, forcing him back against the very tree he'd been hiding in just moments before. Then, one of the state soldiers collapsed onto the grass with a crossbow bolt in his back, and then another, and then a third, and the giant took heart. He swung his hammer in a blur, smashing the skull of the final shocked opponent. And Marianne stepped out from her own hiding place behind a juniper bush. The giant warrior grinned when he saw her and warmly thanked her for rescuing him. His name was Little John, he said, and he'd attacked the convoy hoping to find his sister, who'd been abducted by the state. The girl was not hidden within the wagon, much to his disappointment, but they did find a chest full of gold coins. Little John, hugely impressed by the steely-eyed huntress, invited her to come with him and join the ranks of his gang, which was led by the fabled outlaw known simply as Hood. After some thought, she agreed. It suited her to have extra support as she continued her war against the state, and her education and training meant she was quickly accepted by John's companions. Soon, Marianne proved her value to the outlaws even more. She used her knowledge of mathematics and engineering to help them design new devices they could use to rob the heavily guarded state keeps. The clever system of levers and pulleys allowed them to extract larger quantities of treasure much more quickly than before, and opened up new potential targets for the gang. All these qualities have earned the disenfranchised noblewoman a lofty position within Hood's group, but she still has unfinished business of her own. When her father was murdered, Marianne vowed to continue striking at the state whenever the chance arose. But on top of that, she would take back her lands in the north, along with the title, and in the name that was rightfully hers.